Howdy, welcome to the Cattle Show. I'm Brian McMurray with Cargill Animal Nutrition. You know, every year we've got 28 million head of calves that are born all throughout this country, and from where they're born and raised is quite a distance from where we are today. That's part of our production system, but it presents us with some challenges because we got young calves that have been weaned off their mothers back where they were born and raised, and that's going to create a little bit of stress. You add to that stress the transportation and the various stops along the way, and you can end up with some really high-risk cattle with quite a number of health issues unless you got a good production system to put them into. Now, this canyon where we're at today is called the Paladera Canyon. You can see the rim rock behind me, and right up on top of that rim rock, it flattens out into what we call the cap rock, one of the largest concentrations of fed cattle in the United States. We're going to go visit a yard up here and talk to some health professionals on what we're doing to transition these calves from their home country that they were born and raised in to the cattle feeding country. Joining us now on the Cattle Show is Danny Glasgow, manager of Crow Hollow Feed Yard in Headley, Texas. Danny, thanks for joining us. If you could, let's share with the viewers a little bit about Crow Hollow and what you do here and a little bit about your operation.
Well, we're a 30,000 head custom cattle feeding operation. Typically we receive on a yearly basis probably 20,000 of these high-risk type cattle. Majority of them come out of the south and the southeast and the east, and they are extremely health challenged. We've tried numerous programs in the past, different vaccine regimens, different feeding protocols. Our typical pull rate within the first 30 days could be up higher than 50% at times. Our death loss after 45 days on average probably will run 8 to 12%. We were introduced through Eastern Livestock to Dr. Barker's program. This spring we ran approximately 1,400 calves through here, all on his protocol. We saw a 20% pull rate in 30 days, and our death loss was 3.06%. So you can see the difference that it's made thus far.
Those are some significant reductions in cost.
Yes, they
associated with health. And obviously that savings didn't come for free. You had to do some things. What did you do differently here that you weren't doing before that are having the impact?
It's more hands-on. Of course, we give the dual dose autogenous Bactrin and a little different vaccine program. We're currently feeding our ration, but we're top dressing it with Cargill's nutrient mineral. And I believe that plays a big role in it. I know Eastern Livestock is working with Cargill as well, and they're feeding some transition feed in their barns. They've done it with us on several of these cattle. The cattle that went through that program, I believe we had less than 1% death loss in those cattle. It came right up on feed. Within 20 days, they were eating, well over 3% of their body weight.
Well, that's certainly, the target we were after. We need to get these cattle eating as much as they can early. And, this morning we looked at a set of cattle that had just come in yesterday. Tell me about those cattle. I was even surprised myself to see what I saw when I got here.
Those cattle were purchased from Eastern Livestock, and they were on the transition feed.
High-risk calves now.
High-risk calves.
What'd they weigh?
They off truck weighed 352.
352.
And they received the transition mineral at the barn in Marion, Kentucky. And as you saw, when that feed truck went by at 7:30 this morning, they were pushing themselves out to get to it.
Yeah. And a 350 weight calf.
On a 350 weight calf.
Yeah.
And typically in the past, feed truck would go by and they may or may not get up and even look at you.
Might be a half a dozen out of the whole bunch walk
Right.
up there. Out of 100, say.
Right.
That's where the rubber meets the road right there. You bet. Joining us now on the Cattle Show is Dr. L.D. Barker from Newcastle, Oklahoma. Dr. Barker and Cargill have been working together on a program, and Dr. Barker's here today to visit with us a little about his focus and what he does. LD, glad you could join us on the Cattle Show.
Thank you, Brian. Glad to be here.
Explain to our viewers a little bit about your practice and your business and what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Right. Well, Brian, I've been in practice for like 42 years now. Been a long time and saw a lot of changes that's evolved over the years. And we do our practice. My son's back in practice now and everything. Got a real passion for it. We got a passion for cattle, and it's basically centered around the food animal industry as such. And we do some work with seed stock producers. We work with those type of cow-calf operations. We work with stalker backgrounds and feeder operation, and kind of that's the crux of our business.
We've talked about, in the past, nature of our industry and having to move cattle pretty great distances. And a lot of these younger, lighter cattle more susceptible to immunological challenges. That's really where you've made your mark, and a big part of your focus today is with your solid health program is on those kind of cattle.
Yes, sir. It's gave us an opportunity to do that. We've learned a lot, from it through hands-on operation application of that technology, which is based on an implantable type vaccine where we can give an initial dose, and then a booster dose is given right along with it, where we don't have to handle them back through the chute. And then we offer that antigen, which most conventional vaccines will only be around a few days initially when they're immunized, and it's right, and especially high-stress cattle, it's right at a time that they're at maximum stress, deprived of nutrition. The components they need to build a healthy animal are not right there on day one, but that's when we try to immunize them. So with this and implantable, we offer antigen out over 2 weeks, and every day is better than the day before with their trace mineral needs, their nutrient needs, and ability to build immunity if we give them the right environment to do it. And we're seeing some great benefits out of that approach to it.
You're prescribing the NutriBeef Transition Mineral, in your program. What has happened since you brought that transition mineral technology into the program and really married the two together?
Well, the big thing, and we do some things across the country and do some consulting and stuff, and what it's brought to me is some consistency. I got a good mineral program that offers the complexes and the trace minerals in a manner or form that I know they'll get taken up with that animal and help to raise those tissue levels. And I know whether it's in Florida or whether it's in West Texas that we've got consistency of something that I can recommend that I know that they can get within that region that does the things consistently we know they can do, because we've kind of proven them over the last year or so that they're meeting the needs. We're driving that trace mineral concentration in there, and it gives us the opportunity to add more to it than just what's in the ration.
What we've got to do is stimulate intake. That's our number one, and then make sure we got the right balance of things in there after we've stimulated that intake. Of course, we've accomplished those. Now we marry that up with the program on the stimulating immunity side, where you have to stimulate a more consistent immune response, which you're getting at. You bring those two together, and that's when you start seeing results in performance and reducing the mortality significantly in these kind of high-stress cattle.
Right. We've seen those results in what we've done. I've been working with this and really observing this program for about a year now, and we've seen some really, really neat changes in what we're doing. We've reduced some pull rates, tremendously. I mean, it's really, really dramatic when we can drop by as much as 50 percentage points, from a 68 to an 18 pull rate, and then dropping down, and we've had numbers where we've had no deaths, and we're out 2 weeks or so on some high-stress cattle and had no pulls and no deaths. And we have accepted over the years that these high-stress cattle, we got to accept these 8 and 10% death losses. We got to accept 60, 80% pull rates and those things. And the day has come that we've got the tools that we can minimize those tremendously.
It's almost become the status quo that you're going to have significant health problems and significant mortality and morbidity in these cattle, these high-stress, high-risk cattle. It's just become the status quo. Everybody's just accepted it. Say, well, that's the way it is.
A lot of times the processing of the calves and all has got to be a timed event. Get them in, get them out of there quicker. We're timing you just got to get them done. And what we've seen is this: if we do it right on the front end, we're doing several things which are going to slow them down, but they're through the chute one time. And then we've got ways, we've got a revac program, those kind of things, but we don't have to go back through the chute to do that. But then the majority of those calves, the big end of them, may not have to see a chute again, once they're processed into the system in the yard and everything. From the health standpoint, we do it the first time, do it right through the chute. We're real efficient in what we do, and then we get a tremendous response out of doing it that way and doing it right.
You know, in these high-stress calves, it's virtually impossible to get them to eat too much in the first 5 days. I mean, you know, characteristically, they're going to be a little depressed, but, you know, in 5 days, we can have one eating 3%. He's not going to eat over that, and that's not going to hurt him if you got the right diet in front of him to do it. And when we're getting that done, that lays the foundation for what you need to build on from an immunological standpoint.
And that, you know, we're talking about the transition ration, and that's a very palatable ration. And in the transition minerals got those things that make it more palatable. It helps us in the immunization process because it's got the ingredients and the tools to enhance that. I talked earlier, we'd had that jump from a 68 to an 18% pull rate drop to deads from 5.6 to like a 3.2. And the last 500 head, when he got fully on program, turned out that he had restarted some cattle because this was working so great. But his last 500 head, you know, he had like 17% pull and no death loss. Yeah. And, you know, we're seeing the similar things out of auction markets and locally, you know, where they purchase those calves, and we've seen even a better response where they minimize that hauling stress and everything as well.
When you can reduce morbidity and mortality to that kind of significance, one, it's the right thing to do, but two, economical thing to do when you look at the big picture of what the cost is of treatment of animals. And we're really about prevention. Basically try to put ourselves out of business and not have to treat any cattle.
Well, I think that's our goal. We've got to look at the bottom line, what's the best for that producer, you know, regardless.
Well, it's sure great to work with you, and we're looking forward to a long relationship and a lot more healthy calves in this country. And if we can get out there and get to enough of them, we should be able to save a bunch of calves. We think about health in terms of a pyramid. Now, the way I think about it is I got to lay the base of that pyramid first, and that's going to be my most important layer, just like a foundation of any house. Better be good if you want the house to stay standing, and that's nutrition. We got to make sure that their mineral status is high, their tissue levels are high, or as high as we can get them, so when they do go to the next level of the pyramid, they've got an internal environment that's capable of responding to stimuli the way we want it to. And that brings our next layer in, which is the immunology side of it. And that's that next layer. Now, the way we do that, of course, is through vaccination. And when we lay that layer on, if we've laid the base layer of nutrition, then the cattle will respond. We'll get less vaccination failures. We'll get more of them that can mount the challenge and produce the immunoglobulins necessary to fight off the infections that we're trying to inoculate for. So it's really about getting that immunity there. The next level on that pyramid that we've got to think about is stress. And we have to keep stress at a minimum. There's always going to be some stress, but we can manage it. We can make it easier. Good handling facilities. Handling cattle gently and slowly. You know, the fastest way to work cattle is slow. That's what I've always found out. And you start pushing them fast, and pretty soon you're going to be there all day just trying to get something simple done. So keep that stress low. And it has to do with people. People and the way they handle cattle and the facilities that they put them in. And then the top of that pyramid, right at the point, are the health issues that you're going to have. And the top of that pyramid will be very, very small if you've managed the layers prior to that. What you got to watch out for is letting that pyramid flip over, because you can't manage a pyramid that's been turned over. And you get the point down on the bottom where the bottom is nutrition, and that's the smaller base of your pyramid. You can't manage a pyramid on its point. It's going to topple over, and that's when you're going to run into the biggest health problems. And that pyramid starts to look a lot different, and it starts to hit your bottom line. And not only that, it costs a lot of time and energy, and quite frankly, it just gets real tiring to have to deal with cattle and these huge amount of health problems that can be associated with them if we're not doing the right things. But if you're managing that health pyramid correctly, and we're going to talk to you more about that during the show, you'll find that you're going to have more health problems and higher costs than if you do the right things. When you look at the Solid Health program as a total package with the nutrition and the health protocol, there's some other technology that supports that, and that's your solid dose technology your company has developed. Walk us through that technology and the apparatus, if you will, and how all that works.
Be glad to. Brian, the solid dose technology grew out of the fact to minimize stress on cattle, to minimize going back through the chute. So we, back in the early 90s, got to thinking about a solid dose form where we remove a lot of the undesirables in a vaccine.
Let's show our audience what some of the technology actually looks like.
Be glad to. This is an implant system, we call it Solid Doser, that was developed specifically for this technology and everything. This is the vaccine within this package, and this contains 50 doses, 10 dose clips. The neat thing about this too is we open this up, this thing's sealed, so you can put the vaccine back into this pouch and seal it and put it back in the cooler. You can stop right at the dosage so you don't have any waste from that standpoint. This system is self-advancing. We know on the color code, what's in that. We can do it on specific antigens or group of antigens to know what's in that vaccine. On these autogenous vaccine, it's all regulated by USDA, that we've got a real quality product, that we're meeting the needs of that producer on the other end and all. And then this clip just fits right into the system like that. You've loaded and you've got 10 doses ready to go. And it can deliver those. There's some pellets there.
Yep.
And you notice we got some little green ones, the little tan ones. One of them is the immediate release, and the other is the time release out over that 2 weeks period. So they're small, they're tissue friendly. The initial dose releases immediately. The secondary dose, or the time we call it IR, PR, immediate release, and program release. The program release swells and makes a little gel and releases out over that 2 week period.
Over that time.
Right.
So 6, 7, 8 days into the program, these cattle are really up on their nutrition. They're really up on their nutrition now. We got them on feed. So now they've got some trace minerals in their system.
Right.
So even if they couldn't mount as an effective immune response on day 1 or 2, because their trace mineral status, by day 4, 5, or 6, they're actually in a better nutritional environment to be able to mount a much more effective response, and that's really where we're seeing a lot of.
That's where it's at. And you do, really, in any bacterium, you need initial dosage, which is your primer dose, say more or less, and whereas your second dose is actually the one that builds the immune response. You got to have the primer. It sets up the state for the booster to really build an immune response to it. So as we overcome these stressors, if we happen to PI test these cattle, which we highly recommend on lighter cattle, and we take out those immunosuppressors like a BVD PI calf, we meet the needs of the trace minerals, we remove the parasites and those things through that process. We get out 7 to 8 days, all of a sudden we're starting to get immune response. When the antibiotics wear off or supportive things that we've done to buy time, well then we got an animal hopefully that we're immunizing, got a greater chance for immunity out of it.
The solid dose technology is a perfect example of the kind of technology that's being applied in the industry and that's constantly changing, that really producers have got to stay up on. It's becoming more of a game of efficiency every day, and the kind of technology that's being applied, whether it be on the health side or the nutrition side, understand the various nutrients or the immune responses that we can gain, is a huge advantage for our producers to stay up on this technology and really remain on the cutting edge. Joining us now on the Cattle Show is John Besner with Besner Farms in Dalhart, Texas. John, welcome to the Cattle Show.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about what you guys do here in your farm and family farming operation, and just sort of set the stage for us.
My dad started farming here in the late 60s. At first we were just, farming corn, wheat, alfalfa, that kind of stuff. And in the early 80s we added our cattle operation here, and we've kind of grown it since then. We started with a couple of hundred stocker cattle that first year, and now we start over 10,000 head a year.
You've made a practice of bringing in calves what we would consider pretty high risk a lot of times, and those cattle got some challenges, especially when you start dipping into the lower weights. Set it up for us a little bit about what that picture has looked like in the past and what the kind of challenges are you can see.
Of course, we get a lot of cattle from a lot of different places, different regions of the country. They're all a challenge. A 3-weight naive calf is going to be a challenge.
Yeah. What kind of health issues do you run into, and what kind of work does that require when you're dealing with these kind of calves, in the past?
The main thing that we have trouble with, of course, are respiratory problems, and we have some scour problems and those kind of things. But
characteristically, we'll hear people say, you may have to doctor half of them or more.
On a good set of cattle, in our projections, we figure 65%.
Is that right?
Pull rate, yeah.
And the expense of that care is?
Well, every time you pull one out of the pen, it's going to cost you $30.
Boy, that's a cost you can sure like to reduce as much as possible.
Yeah, you have to reduce it as much as possible.
Now here recently, you made some changes. You've been working with L.D. Barker and his Solid Health program and doing some different things nutritionally. How's this business different as far as the front end of these cattle when they come in and their performance throughout versus what you would have seen in the past?
We haven't changed our ration a bit. We're feeding exactly the same feed as what we did before LD came down. The one thing that we are doing is we're top dressing the feed with Cargill mineral called transition mineral, and we do that. It's a non-medicated mineral that that we put on for 5 days, the first 5 days. And we feed that at about a half a pound per head. Starting at day 5, we feed transition mineral with a CTC.
With a medicated version.
Medicated,
Yep.
yeah. And we feed that for about 5 days.
Now, since you started that program, you've noted some pretty good differences in the health of these calves. What's that look like?
Since we started this program, we cut that from 65% to about 28%. So at $30 a head, you do the math, that's worth a lot of money.
John, we appreciate you joining us on
You
the
bet.
Cattle Show. Thanks for your insights.
Thank you for coming by.
You bet. You know, we thought we'd take a minute and visit with Jimmy Labry, Business Development Manager for Cargill Animal Nutrition. Jimmy, glad to be here.
Thanks, Brian.
When you come up from that broken country down there in the Paladera Canyon and get up on top of the cap up here in the high plains, the country probably looks a little different than it did a number of years ago. People might think it's pretty wide open, and of course it is kind of flat, but it's not the old grass country that we used to think about, is it?
That's right, Brian. This country's changed a lot over the years. One big change we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years is there has been a lot more farmland go in, and so we're doing a lot more farming, growing a lot more ingredients than we used to grow, and so that's changed the whole area.
And the cattle feeding industry really has propagated that. I mean, really set the environment to grow these crops a little closer to the animals, cut transportation costs, so from an efficiency standpoint, it can sure make some sense.
That's true, Brian. We are definitely in the cattle feeding area here where there's a lot of cattle not only grown but finished, and so being able to grow the grain and the forages is very important.
You're helping people out and really making their job easier and more fun, as you said. We're also helping reduce some costs.
Not only medicine costs, labor costs, but just the cost of the cattle not performing up to their genetic potential is huge. And so our goal is to help reduce those costs and help these producers become more profitable.
And we do that by making sure that our customers really understand what that health pyramid looks like that we talk about and how to manage that health pyramid. That's really important.
It's huge, Brian. If we can manage that to where they are reducing those costs and doing the right things up front, then we will help those cattle and those producers to be more successful.
We hope you've enjoyed this edition of the Cattle Show, and it's been our pleasure to bring it to you. You know, when you start dealing with the cattle like the ones you see behind me, this is when it really gets important to make sure that you're really dotting the I's and crossing the T's and really have a good program. The Solid Health program that we've been visiting you about that includes a technology that Dr. Barker's described and NutriBeef Transition Mineral that we've talked about from a nutrition standpoint. Those two are critical components of managing that pyramid. And these cattle behind me, they're going to need all the help they can get. If we put these cattle in the right environment, handle them, keep their stress low, and follow the protocols that are outlined, we're going to really make a big difference in these calves' lives. Few of them are going to get sick. That lower morbidity is a huge value and a whole lot less stress on people as well. And you're going to have lower mortality rates, you're going to have more healthy calves performing better, and that's going to go right to your bottom line. We appreciate you joining us on the Cattle Show, and we'll see you next week.
If you have a product or service that you'd like to see featured on a future program, or if you have questions or comments, please contact us.